"Mom, you shouldn't worry about bills anymore. Just sign here." That's what my son David said to me on a Tuesday morning in October, standing in my kitchen with papers spread across the table like he was conducting some kind of business meeting in the place where I used to make his school lunches. The pen felt heavy in my trembling fingers, heavier than it should have been for something so small. Behind me, the kettle was whistling, that sharp, insistent sound that demanded attention, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stared at those papers, at his expectant face, at the signature line that seemed to glow like a trap waiting to spring. And I signed. God help me, I signed those papers because I trusted him. Because he was my son. Because 34 years of loving him had trained me to believe that everything he did was for my own good. But as I set that pen down and looked into his satisfied smile, something cold settled in my chest. Something that whispered a truth I wasn't ready to hear yet. He has no idea what that signature really meant. Not what it meant to him. Oh, he knew exactly what it meant to him. He knew it meant access, control, the keys to everything I'd worked for my entire life. No, he had no idea what it meant to me. He had no idea he'd just signed his own confession. You want to know how we got here? How a mother who sacrificed everything for her child ended up sitting across from him like a stranger, signing away pieces of herself? Let me tell you about the woman I used to be, before I learned that love can be weaponized, before I discovered that the child you raise can become the predator you never saw coming. I was 22 when David was born, and his father was nothing more than a name on a birth certificate and a promise that evaporated the moment he heard the word pregnant. So it was just David and me against the world, and I thought that was romantic somehow. I thought struggle built character. I thought working 2 jobs while going to night school was noble, heroic even. I remember those early mornings, leaving for my shift at the diner while it was still dark outside, the rain turning the world into a watercolor painting through my windshield. David would still be sleeping in his crib, and I'd kiss his forehead and whisper promises about the life we were going to build together. Someday, I'd tell him, Mommy's going to buy us a real house with a big yard where you can play. Someday we're going to take vacations like the families on TV. Someday you're going to have everything you need, and you'll never have to worry about money the way Mommy does. Those somedays kept me going through the exhaustion that felt like drowning, through the nights when I'd fall asleep at the kitchen table with accounting textbooks spread around me like a paper fortress. I'd wake up with pages stuck to my cheek and David calling for me from his room, and I'd stumble to him with a smile because that's what mothers do. We smile through the pain. We make it look easy even when it's killing us. But God, those smiles he gave me in return. Those were what made it all worth it. The way his face would light up when I came home from work, like I was the most important person in the world. The way he'd run to me with his arms outstretched, trusting completely that I would catch him. The way he'd curl up next to me on our second-hand couch and fall asleep with his head on my shoulder while we watched cartoons. I love you, Mama, he'd say in that sweet, sleepy voice, and my heart would nearly explode with the fierce, protective love that only a mother knows. I would have walked through fire for that boy. I would have sold my soul to keep him safe and happy. And maybe that was my first mistake. Maybe loving someone that much makes you blind to who they really are. By the time David was 10, I'd finished my degree and landed a job at an accounting firm. Nothing glamorous, but steady, with benefits and the promise of a future that looked brighter than our past. We moved into a real house, not the mansion I'd dreamed of, but a 3-bedroom ranch with a backyard where David could play soccer and a garage where I could park my car instead of scraping ice off the windshield every morning. I thought I'd made it. I thought we'd made it. I worked my way up from junior accountant to senior financial analyst, learned to manage other people's money with a precision that impressed my bosses and earned me raises and promotions. I was good at it maybe because I understood the weight of every dollar, the way financial security could transform a life. David thrived too, or so I thought. Good grades, soccer team, college scholarship to study business. I was so proud of him, so proud of us, of what we'd built together from nothing. When he graduated and got his first job, I cried at the ceremony because I remembered that scared 22-year-old girl who didn't know how she was going to provide for her baby, and here we were, both of us successful and secure. "You did it, Mom," he said to me that day, wrapping me in a hug that smelled like his cologne and success. "You gave me everything I needed." I raised him to be secure. Not to make me disappear. But somewhere along the way, security became greed. Somewhere along the way, the boy who used to thank me for every small gift became a man who saw my bank account as his inheritance. Somewhere along the way, love became leverage. It started so gradually I didn't even notice at first. Little suggestions that seemed helpful, caring even. "Mom, you really should set up online banking. It's so much more convenient. Let me show you how to use this app. You can manage everything from your phone. Why don't you let me help you with your bills? I know how confusing all this technology can be." Technology. That was his weapon of choice, wrapped in concern and delivered with the patronizing patience of a son who thought his 60-year-old mother was too old to understand the modern world. And maybe I was. Maybe that's why I didn't see what was happening until it was almost too late. He'd come over on weekends, bringing his laptop and his helpful smile, sitting at my kitchen table and walking me through passwords and account settings. "This will make everything so much easier for you, Mom. No more checks to write, no more stamps to buy. Everything automatic." I should have been suspicious when he insisted on setting up all my passwords himself. "For security," he said. "You want something nobody else would guess." But what nobody else would guess included me, apparently, because within a few weeks I couldn't access my own accounts without calling him first. "Mom, you're overthinking this," he'd say when I'd fumble with the login screen. "Just call me when you need to check something. It's easier that way." Easier for whom, I should have asked. But I didn't, because he was my son, and sons don't steal from their mothers. Sons don't gaslight the women who raised them, don't convince them they're becoming forgetful and incompetent when they're actually being systematically robbed. The gaslighting, God, that was almost worse than the theft. The way he'd look at me with those concerned eyes when I'd mention a transaction I didn't remember making. "Mom, you bought those groceries on Tuesday. Don't you remember? We talked about it." The way he'd exchange glances with his wife Jennifer when I'd ask about a withdrawal I didn't authorize. "She's been having these little memory lapses," he'd tell her, right in front of me, like I wasn't even there. Jennifer. Sweet, supportive Jennifer who always had such helpful suggestions about my condition. "You know, there are wonderful communities for people your age," she'd say over dinner, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Places where you wouldn't have to worry about managing all these complicated financial things." I wasn't losing my mind. I was losing my money, my autonomy, my dignity, one small theft at a time. But when everyone around you insists you're confused, when the person you trust most in the world tells you that your memory is failing, you start to doubt yourself. You start to wonder if maybe you really are losing your grip on reality. That's the insidious thing about financial abuse when it comes from family. It's not a stranger breaking into your house and stealing your jewelry. It's not some obvious scam artist calling you on the phone. It's your own child, the person who knows exactly which buttons to push, exactly how to make you question your own perceptions. And the isolation, Jesus, the isolation was masterful. "Mom, you know Mrs. Patterson from next door has been asking a lot of questions about your business," David would say. "Maybe it's better if you don't discuss your finances with the neighbors. You never know who you can trust these days." One by one, my support system disappeared. Friends stopped calling because David had changed my phone plan to one that somehow never received their messages. My weekly coffee date with my sister became too stressful for someone with my memory issues. Even my doctor's appointments became something David needed to manage, because we can't have you forgetting to take your medications. I remember one evening, sitting in my kitchen as the sun set outside my window, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and wondering when my life had become so quiet. When had I become so dependent on my son for every small decision? When had I stopped being Margaret Thompson, successful financial analyst and independent woman, and become mom with the memory problems? That's when I noticed the refrigerator cord. It was unplugged, had been for hours, and I had no memory of unplugging it. But David had been over that afternoon, had been in the kitchen while I was in the bathroom, and suddenly that humming silence felt ominous. Threatening. Like evidence of something I couldn't quite name yet. But late that night, I heard his voice through the thin walls of my house. He was on the phone in the guest room, talking in the low, careful tones people use when they're discussing something they shouldn't be discussing. "She won't notice for months," he said, and ice shot through my veins. "The automatic payments will cover everything that matters, and by the time she figures out something's wrong, we'll be in the Bahamas." The Bahamas. The vacation he and Jennifer had been planning, the one they said they were saving for by cutting back on expenses and working extra hours. The vacation that was apparently being funded by money stolen from his mother's accounts. I sat on my bed in the dark, my hand pressed over my mouth to keep from making a sound, and felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart that had been breaking slowly for months. This was something deeper, something foundational. This was the moment I realized that the child I'd loved and sacrificed for had grown into a man who saw me as nothing more than a piggy bank to be broken when he needed cash. But with that realization came something else. Something harder and more determined than grief. If my son thought I was a confused old woman who wouldn't notice her money disappearing, he'd forgotten one crucial thing about me. I was a financial analyst. I'd spent 30 years helping people manage their money, tracking down discrepancies, following paper trails that seemed to lead nowhere. I knew how to read bank statements, how to trace transactions, how to build a case from scattered pieces of evidence. And if David thought he could steal from me without consequences, he was about to learn that he'd underestimated the woman who'd raised him. The next morning, I walked to the pharmacy to pick up my prescriptions, my wallet and my purse, and confidence in my step. I wasn't worried. Why should I be? I had plenty of money in my checking account, had seen the balance just last week when David had helped me check it online. But when the pharmacist ran my card, her face creased with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson. This card has been declined. Would you like to try a different payment method?" Declined. My card, with my name on it, connected to my account, had been declined for a prescription that cost $37. $37 I knew I had, should have had, would have had if my son hadn't been systematically draining my accounts while convincing me I was losing my mind. I drove home in a fog of rage so thick I could barely see the road. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. But underneath the fury was something cleaner, sharper. Something that felt like clarity. Fear sounds like static, like white noise that drowns out everything else until you can't think straight. But anger has clarity. Anger has focus. Anger makes lists and plans and doesn't stop until justice is served. I went straight to my computer, the one David had been so helpful in setting up for me, and logged into my bank account using passwords I'd written down and hidden where he'd never think to look. And there it was, spread across months of statements like a roadmap of betrayal. $300 here, $500 there. Transfers to accounts I'd never opened, payments to companies I'd never heard of. Thousands of dollars, tens of thousands, moved with the casual efficiency of someone who thought they'd never be caught. But the pattern was clear, and the evidence was damning, and I sat in my quiet kitchen printing page after page of proof that my son was a thief. Not just any thief, the worst kind. The kind who steals from the person who loves them most, who uses that love as a weapon to paralyze their victim into silence. When David called that afternoon to check on me, I was ready. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, my voice perfectly normal, perfectly confused. "I had the strangest thing happen at the pharmacy today. My card didn't work. Isn't that odd?" "Oh, Mom," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice that I was still playing the role of befuddled elder. "You probably just mistyped your PIN. Those machines can be tricky." "You're probably right," I agreed. "Maybe you could help me check my account later? I get so confused by all those numbers." "Of course, Mom. I'll come by this weekend and we'll sort everything out." This weekend. He'd come by this weekend and help me sort everything out, never knowing that I'd already sorted it out myself. never knowing that I'd spent the afternoon on the phone with attorney Mendoza, a woman whose reputation for taking down financial predators was legendary in our small town. Do nothing he can trace, she'd warned me. Don't change passwords, don't move money, don't let him know you're onto him. Let him think he's still in control while we build our case. So I played the part. Confused Margaret, forgetful Margaret, Margaret who needed her son's help to navigate the complicated world of modern banking. But underneath that performance, I was learning. Learning to access my accounts from computers at the library, learning to print statements without leaving a digital trail, learning to build a fortress of evidence that would be impossible to tear down. Mrs. Elise from next door became my unlikely ally. At 78, she had the sharp wit of a prosecutor and the fierce loyalty of someone who'd lived through enough betrayals to spot them from a mile away. That boy of yours is up to something, she said one afternoon as we sat on her porch drinking iced tea. I've seen men like him before. Too smooth, too helpful, too eager to manage things that aren't theirs to manage. I told her everything, the missing money, the gaslighting, the slow erosion of my independence. She listened with the quiet intensity of someone who'd been waiting her whole life for this conversation. My late husband tried the same thing, she said finally. Started small, just like your David. Let me handle the bills, honey. Let me take care of the investments. You don't need to worry your pretty little head about money. By the time I caught on, he'd gambled away half our savings and convinced me I was too emotional to understand finances. What did you do? She smiled, and there was steel in that smile. I divorced him and took everything he had left. Men like that, they think women are stupid. That's their weakness, underestimating us. So I learned from Mrs. Elise too. Learned to be patient, to be strategic, to think 3 moves ahead like this was a chess game where the stakes were my entire future. She helped me set up a new bank account at a different institution, one David knew nothing about. She drove me to meetings with attorney Mendoza, waited in lobbies while I gave depositions, held my hand when the weight of betrayal threatened to crush me. Meanwhile, David was getting careless. Success had made him bold, and boldness had made him stupid. He'd started bragging at work about his new investment opportunities, about the property he was going to buy, about the vacation home in the Bahamas where he and Jennifer could escape the dreary winters. Property. Vacation home. All funded by money stolen from his mother's retirement accounts. One Thursday afternoon, Mrs. Elise called me with barely contained excitement in her voice. Turn on Channel 7, she said. Your boy's boss is being interviewed about some big business deal. I turned on the television just in time to see David's smiling face on the screen, standing next to his boss outside some fancy office building, talking about expansion and opportunity and the bright future ahead of him. We're projecting 30% growth over the next 2 years, David was saying, his chest puffed out with pride. I've just secured funding for a major property investment that's going to put us on the map. Secured funding. From where, David? From which account did you secure that funding? But I knew the answer, had seen the withdrawals on my statements, had traced the money from my retirement fund to his business account like following breadcrumbs through a dark forest. Attorney Mendoza had warned me this moment would come, when his theft would escalate from casual skimming to major embezzlement. When small crimes would become felonies, when the stakes would get high enough that law enforcement would take notice. When he makes his next big move, she'd said, we'll be ready. The invitation came on a Friday. David called that morning, sounding more cheerful than he had in months. Mom, how about dinner this weekend? Jennifer's making her famous lasagna, and we have some exciting news to share. Exciting news. My stomach clenched with the knowledge of what that news would be, but my voice stayed calm and pleasant. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Can I bring anything? Just yourself, Mom. And maybe that chocolate cake you used to make when I was little? You know, the one with the fudge frosting? The cake he'd loved as a child, back when I was his hero instead of his victim. Back when my love was something precious instead of something to be exploited. Of course, I said. I'll bring dessert. But I'd be bringing more than dessert to that dinner. I'd be bringing justice, served cold and sweet and absolutely final. The recording device was smaller than I'd expected, no bigger than a pen cap and easily concealed in the handle of the serving spoon I'd used to cut the cake. Attorney Mendoza had explained how it worked, how it would capture everything said within a 10-foot radius, how it would provide the final piece of evidence we needed to destroy David's life the way he'd tried to destroy mine. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she'd asked me. "Once we have him on tape admitting to the theft, there's no going back. He'll face criminal charges, probably prison time. His career will be over, his marriage will likely end, his life as he knows it will disappear." I'd looked at her across her polished desk, this woman who'd spent her career protecting people like me from people like my son, and felt something cold and final settle in my chest. "He made that choice when he decided to steal from me," I'd said. "I'm just making sure he faces the consequences." Saturday evening, I drove to David's house with a chocolate cake in a covered carrier and a heart full of righteous fury. The house looked the same as always: neat lawn, painted shutters, the kind of suburban perfection that said "successful young professional" to anyone driving by. But I knew now how that success had been purchased, whose retirement had been sacrificed to maintain that pristine facade. Jennifer answered the door with her usual bright smile and air-kiss greeting, taking the cake carrier from my hands like she was accepting a gift instead of evidence that would help convict her husband. "Margaret, you're such a treasure," she said, leading me into the dining room where David was already seated at the head of the table like some kind of patriarch. David's been so excited to share our news. The table was set with their good china, the kind of expensive place settings that young couples register for when they get married and think they'll have elegant dinner parties every weekend. Candles flickered in crystal holders, wine glasses caught the light like tiny prisons for illumination. It was beautiful. It was perfect. It was the last meal David would eat as a free man. "Mom, you look wonderful," David said, standing to hug me with the same arms that had forged my signature, the same hands that had stolen my security. "I'm so glad you could make it tonight." We ate Jennifer's lasagna and made small talk about the weather, about my garden, about their plans for the summer. I played my part perfectly: doting mother, grateful for the invitation, proud of her successful son and his lovely wife. But underneath the performance, I was vibrating with anticipation, waiting for the moment when the mask would slip and the real David would emerge. It came with dessert, of course. As I cut the chocolate cake with my specially prepared serving spoon, David cleared his throat and reached for a manila folder that had been sitting on the sideboard throughout dinner. "Mom, Jennifer and I have been talking, and we think it's time to make some changes to how you handle your finances." Here it was. The big ask, the final theft, the moment when he'd tried to take everything instead of just skimming from the top. "Oh?" I said, setting down the cake server and folding my hands in my lap like a good, obedient mother. "We've been worried about you," Jennifer chimed in, her voice syrupy with false concern. "These little memory lapses, the confusion with your bank accounts. We think it would be better if David had legal authority to manage your money. You know, to protect you from making mistakes." David opened the folder and spread papers across the table like a dealer laying out cards for a rigged game. Power of attorney documents, legal papers that would give him complete control over every penny I'd ever earned, every investment I'd ever made, every aspect of my financial life. "This is just a formality, Mom," he said, his voice as smooth as oil on water. "You'll still have access to everything you need, but this way I can make sure all your bills are paid, all your investments are properly managed. You won't have to worry about any of it anymore. Won't have to worry because I won't have any choice. Won't have to make decisions because I won't be allowed to make them. Won't have to manage my money because I won't have any money left to manage." I looked at those papers, at his expectant face, at Jennifer's encouraging smile, and felt the weight of 34 years of motherhood pressing down on my shoulders. 34 years of sacrifice, of love, of believing that family meant something sacred and unbreakable. But family goes both ways. Love goes both ways. And when your own child tries to steal your future, they forfeit their right to your protection. I picked up the pen he offered me, a different pen than the one I'd used to sign away my independence all those months ago. This pen felt lighter, more purposeful. This pen was going to save my life instead of destroying it. I signed my name on the signature line with a steady hand, then set the pen down and looked up at David's relieved face. "You wanted my signature?" I said, my voice calm and clear and cold as winter ice. "You just signed your confession." The confusion in his eyes was almost comical. He looked at the papers, at me, at Jennifer, trying to understand what had just happened. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, hitting the speed dial number for Attorney Mendoza. She answered on the first ring, as we'd arranged. "Patricia, it's Margaret." He did it. He tried to get me to sign over power of attorney, and it's all on tape. David's face went white, then red, then a sickly green color that told me he finally understood what was happening. Jennifer made a small sound like air escaping from a punctured tire. "You recorded us?" David whispered. "You can't do that. That's illegal." "Actually, it's perfectly legal in this state as long as one party consents to the recording," I said, standing up from the table with as much dignity as I could muster. "And I consented. I consented to documenting your confession to systematic financial abuse, to elder fraud, to theft of over $40,000 from my accounts." The sound of sirens was already audible in the distance, growing closer by the second. Attorney Mendoza had called the police the moment I'd given her the signal, and they were coming to arrest my son for stealing from his mother. "Mom, please," David said, and for a moment he sounded like the little boy he used to be, scared and desperate and looking to me to fix everything. "We can work this out. I'll pay it back. I'll do whatever you want." But it was too late for that. It had been too late the moment he'd decided I was nothing more than an ATM with a heartbeat. "What I want," I said, picking up my purse and walking toward the front door, "is for you to face the consequences of what you've done. What I want is for other mothers to be safe from their own children. What I want is justice." The police cars pulled up just as I reached the driveway, their red and blue lights painting David's perfect house in colors of reckoning. I gave my statement to Detective Morrison, a kind woman who'd seen too many cases like mine, handed over the recording device and the copies of bank statements I'd prepared. "Mrs. Thompson," she said as they led David away in handcuffs, "I want you to know how brave you were to come forward. Elder financial abuse is one of the most underreported crimes because victims are often too ashamed or too afraid to press charges against family members." I watched my son duck his head as they put him in the back of the patrol car, and felt something break inside my chest that had nothing to do with heartbreak and everything to do with relief. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't come with trumpets or fanfare or dramatic music. Justice is quiet enough to hear yourself breathe again. Justice is the sound of handcuffs clicking shut and car doors closing and sirens fading into the distance, taking your betrayer away from your life forever. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed, in my own house, with access to my own bank accounts for the first time in over a year. I made myself coffee 1 cup, because I was the only one who mattered now, and sat at my kitchen table reading the newspaper. Not to an empty chair this time, but to myself. For myself. The story was already in the paper, of course. "Local businessman arrested for elder fraud" read the headline, and there was David's professional headshot staring back at me from the front page. The golden boy, the successful son, the man who'd built his career on money stolen from his mother. By that afternoon, the phone was ringing constantly. Reporters wanting statements, neighbors wanting gossip, Jennifer calling to scream at me for destroying her marriage. But I unplugged the phone and sat in my garden, listening to the birds sing and the wind rustle through the trees I'd planted when David was still small enough to help me water them. His world was collapsing, just as it should. The bank had frozen his accounts pending investigation. His employer had suspended him indefinitely. Jennifer had packed her bags and gone to her mother's house, taking their joint credit cards and leaving nothing but a note about not signing up for this. But my world was expanding. For the first time in months, I could access my own money, make my own decisions, plan my own future without asking permission from anyone. The isolation that had felt so suffocating was now peaceful solitude. The silence that had seemed ominous was now the quiet contentment of a woman who'd reclaimed her life. Attorney Mendoza called to tell me the prosecutor was confident of conviction, that David would likely serve 3 to 5 years in federal prison for elder fraud and money laundering. She also told me about the civil suit we'd filed to recover the stolen money, though she warned me that most of it was probably gone, spent on the lifestyle David had thought he deserved. "I don't care about the money," I told her, and realized I meant it. "I care about making sure he can't do this to anyone else." 1 year later, I'm sitting in a new house by the ocean, 3 states away from the scene of my son's crimes. The garden here is smaller but sunnier, and I've planted tomatoes and herbs and flowers that remind me why I used to love getting my hands dirty in the soil. David is in prison, where he'll stay for the next 4 years if he behaves himself. Jennifer divorced him 6 months ago and moved to California, where she's apparently found herself a new Mark, some widower with a pension and poor judgment. I should probably warn him, but I've learned that some people have to make their own mistakes. I never visit David, never write him letters, never send him money for commissary. He's written to me exactly once, a rambling letter full of excuses and self-pity and requests that I speak to the judge about early release. I threw it away without finishing it. Some people might say I'm heartless, that family should forgive family, that a mother's love should be unconditional. But love isn't a suicide pact. Love doesn't require you to let someone destroy you just because you share DNA. He tried to handle my money. Instead, I learned how to handle my life. I've become something of an expert on elder financial abuse, speaking at community centers and senior living facilities about the warning signs, about the tactics predators use, about the resources available to victims. It's painful work, telling my story over and over again, watching recognition dawn in the eyes of listeners who realize they're living through their own versions of my nightmare. But it's also healing work. Every person who comes up to me afterward, every phone call from someone who's found the courage to report their own abusive family member, every success story from someone who escaped before losing everything, these are the moments that make the betrayal worthwhile. Because that's the thing about trauma, you can let it destroy you, or you can let it teach you how to destroy it instead. I'm 61 years old now, financially independent, emotionally free, and dangerous to anyone who thinks they can take advantage of my age or my gender or my trusting nature. I've learned to trust my instincts, to question helpful offers, to verify every signature and transaction and transfer. I've also learned that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we love best, and that's not our fault. We don't create monsters by loving them. We don't deserve betrayal because we were trusting. We don't owe forgiveness to people who see our love as weakness to be exploited. The kettle is whistling again as I finish telling you this story, that same insistent sound that used to fill me with such dread. But now it just means tea is ready, that I have a choice to make about what flavor I want, about whether I'll drink it in the kitchen or on the porch or in my garden where the tomatoes are finally turning red. Such a small choice, really. Such a simple thing. But after months of having every decision made for me, every choice taken away, every aspect of my life controlled by someone who thought I was too old and too stupid to manage my own affairs, the freedom to choose my tea flavor feels like a revolution. David thought he was entitled to my money because he was my son, because I'd spent 34 years putting his needs before my own, because society tells us that children take care of their aging parents and sometimes that care requires taking control. But care doesn't require control. Love doesn't require surrender. And family doesn't mean you have to let someone steal your future just because you helped create theirs. So here I am, sitting by the ocean with my tea and my freedom and my hard-won wisdom, telling you this story because someone needs to hear it. Someone needs to know that it's possible to fight back, even when the predator lives in your house and calls you mom. Someone needs to know that justice is possible, even when it means choosing prosecution over forgiveness, even when it means watching your own child go to prison. What would you have done? Forgive or forget? That's the question I get asked most often when I tell this story, and I understand why people ask it. We're taught that mothers are supposed to be endlessly forgiving, that family bonds are sacred, that love means never giving up on someone no matter what they do to you. But I've learned there's a difference between forgiveness and enabling, between love and self-destruction. I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their actions. I've learned that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. So no, I didn't forgive David. I stopped him. I stopped him from stealing any more of my money, from abusing any more elderly parents, from teaching his future children that taking advantage of people who love you is acceptable behavior. And I didn't forget either. I remember every detail of what he did to me, every lie he told, every time he made me doubt my own sanity. I remember because forgetting would dishonor the woman I used to be, the one who worked 2 jobs and went to night school and sacrificed everything to give her son a better life. That woman deserved better than betrayal. She deserved a son who protected her golden years instead of stealing them. She deserved to be safe in her own family. She deserved justice. And in the end, that's exactly what she got.